Some people spend their whole lives running from the past, only to find it waiting for them at the kitchen table. Jude Maddox thought she'd left hers buried in the mountains 30 years ago. She runs a small diner at the base of Whisper Ridge. Coffee strong, words few, questions unwelcome. One autumn morning, a well-dressed stranger walks through her door. Harlan Kitt, velvet vest and polished shoes, orders breakfast like any other customer. But then he slides a folded note across the counter. Just a name, a location, and a single request. Jude's hands go still. Behind the stranger stands a man in black, silent and watching. The note isn't a threat, it's something worse. It's the truth she's been hiding from. What was written on that paper, and why would it shake a woman who never shakes? Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from, and subscribe. Tomorrow's story will surprise you. The diner sat at the base of Whisper Ridge, like a way station between two worlds. The valley below with its paved roads and streetlights, and the mountains above where the pine forests grew so thick that sunlight only reached the ground in scattered coins of gold. The building itself was honest wood, weathered grey by decades of mountain wind and snow. A hand-painted sign hung above the door, Maddox's. No apostrophe, no flourish. Just a name that had been there so long, most folks forgot there was a person behind it. Jude Maddox opened the diner every morning at 5:30, winter and summer alike. She'd unlock the front door, flip the sign from closed to open, and start the coffee before the first truck pulled into the gravel lot. The routine never changed. Coffee first always, then the grill heating slow and even, then the prep work. Bacon laid out in neat rows, eggs cracked into a bowl, potatoes peeled and diced with the kind of efficiency that came from doing the same task 10,000 times. She was 57 years old, though she looked older in some lights and younger in others. Her hands were what gave her away. Calloused and scarred, the hands of someone who'd spent more time working with them than worrying about how they looked. Her hair, once dark as creek water, had gone silver at the temples, and she kept it tied back in a braid that hung between her shoulder blades. Her face was lean, weathered by wind and sun, with lines around her eyes that came from squinting at distant horizons rather than smiling. She rarely smiled. The regulars knew not to expect much conversation. Jude would take your order, bring your food, refill your coffee, and leave you alone. That was the arrangement, and it suited everyone just fine. In a world that seemed to demand you share every thought and feeling, Jude's silence was a kind of sanctuary. People came to the diner not just for the food, though the food was good, honest portions that stuck to your ribs, but for the permission to sit quietly and eat without having to perform some version of themselves. Vincent was usually first through the door. 72 years old, retired logger, hands like tree roots, and a face that had seen every kind of weather the mountains could throw at a man. He'd take the same stool at the counter, third from the left, and wait for Jude to pour his coffee. Black, no sugar. He never had to ask, and she never had to confirm. "Morning, Jude," he'd say. "Vincent," she'd reply. That was the extent of it most days. He'd read the newspaper he brought with him. She'd cook his eggs and bacon, and they'd exist in comfortable parallel silence until he finished, left exact change on the counter, and walked back out to his truck. Sometimes he'd mention the weather. Sometimes she'd nod. It was enough. After Vincent came the breakfast rush, though rush was a generous word for it. Maybe a dozen people between 6 and 8 o'clock. Truck drivers passing through on the highway. Construction workers heading up to the logging sites. A few local business owners grabbing something quick before opening their shops in town. Jude knew most of them by face, if not by name, knew their orders, knew to leave them in peace. She moved through the diner with practiced efficiency, never hurried but never slow. The space was small enough that she could manage it alone. 6 stools at the counter, 4 tables with red vinyl chairs, a kitchen visible through a pass-through window. The walls were bare, except for a few old photographs of Whisper Ridge from decades past, back when the town was bigger and the logging industry still had legs. There was no music, no television, no decoration beyond what was functional. The diner was a tool, and Jude kept it clean and sharp. By 9 o'clock, the morning crowd had thinned. This was when Jude did the real work. cleaning the grill, prepping for lunch, taking inventory. She kept a notebook behind the counter, pages filled with her cramped handwriting. Supply orders, expense tracking, notes to herself about what needed fixing. The diner ran on thin margins, but it ran. That was what mattered. She'd bought the place 17 years ago with money she'd saved working other people's kitchens, cleaning other people's houses, doing whatever work the mountains offered to someone who asked no questions and expected no favors. The previous owner, a man named Dutton, had been ready to retire and didn't much care who bought it as long as they paid cash. Jude had paid cash. No bank, no loan, no paper trail beyond the deed transfer. She'd kept the name out of habit more than sentiment. Maddox was her family name, though there was no family left to speak of. Her cabin sat 3 miles up the mountain road, accessible only by a dirt track that turned to mud in spring and froze solid in winter. She'd built most of it herself, with help from a few old-timers who knew their way around a hammer and didn't ask why a woman in her 30s wanted to live so far from everything. It was small, 1 room with a loft for sleeping, a wood stove for heat, a propane burner for cooking. She had solar panels for electricity and a well for water. No phone line, no internet, no connection to the grid. Just her and the trees and the silence. People in town respected her boundaries. They'd learned early on that Jude Maddox didn't do small talk, didn't attend community events, didn't involve herself in local politics or gossip. She paid her taxes on time, kept her business clean and legal, and caused no trouble. In return, they left her alone. It was an unspoken agreement, the kind of thing that only worked in places small enough that people still understood the value of minding their own business. But there were whispers, of course. There always were. Whispers about why a woman would choose to live like that, alone, cut off. Some said she'd lost someone, a husband, a child, and couldn't bear to be around people anymore. Some said she was running from something, though from what, nobody could say. Some said she was just strange, and that was explanation enough. Jude heard the whispers, though people tried to be discreet. She didn't care. Let them wonder. Their curiosity couldn't touch her. The truth, which she'd never shared with anyone, was simpler and more complicated than any of their guesses. She'd been 19 when she left the valley, pregnant and unwelcome in her own family's home. Her father, a proud man broken by loss and debt, had given her a choice that wasn't really a choice at all. Leave or bring shame on what little remained of the Maddox name. She'd left, walked into the mountains with a backpack and a sleeping bag and nothing else, determined to survive on her own terms. The baby had been born in a county hospital 2 states away. A girl, small and perfect and terrifying. Jude had held her for exactly 10 minutes before signing the adoption papers. She'd been too young, too poor, too broken to be anyone's mother. The social worker had been kind, had assured her she was making the right choice, that the baby would go to a good family. Jude had nodded and walked out of the hospital and never looked back. That had been 30 years ago. 30 years of moving, working, surviving. She'd spent the first decade drifting, waiting tables, cleaning hotels, picking fruit, doing whatever kept her fed and moving. She'd learned to hunt, to trap, to live off the land when necessary. She'd learned which people could be trusted and which couldn't, learned to read danger in a glance or a gesture. The mountains had been her teacher, harsh but fair. Eventually, she'd found her way back to Whisper Ridge, though not to the valley where she'd grown up. She stayed in the high country, away from the town proper, away from anyone who might remember her. She'd changed enough, weathered and hardened, that even if someone from her past saw her, they likely wouldn't recognize the girl she'd been. That girl was gone. In her place was this woman, this mountain woman, who asked nothing and gave little. The diner closed at 2 o'clock most days, earlier if business was slow. Jude would lock up, count the register, and make the drive back up the mountain. The road was steep and rutted, impassable for most vehicles, but her old truck knew every rock and groove. She'd park in the clearing beside her cabin, gather whatever supplies she'd brought from town, and walk the last 100 yards through the trees. Before entering, she always stopped, always looked. The tree line, the approach, the cabin itself, checking for anything out of place, any sign that someone had been there while she was gone. It was habit, Instinct, the kind of vigilance that came from years of being alone and needing to stay that way. Only after she was satisfied would she unlock the door and step inside. Inside, the cabin smelled like wood smoke and pine. Simple, clean spare. A bed, a table, a stove. Shelves lined with books she'd collected over the years. Field guides, survival manuals, a few novels, a trunk beneath the bed that held her winter clothes and other things she didn't look at often. The leather journal, the wooden box, the photograph. She'd light the stove if it was cold, heat water for tea, and sit at the table watching the light fade through the window. This was her time, the quiet hours when the day's work was done and the night hadn't quite arrived. She'd think or not think, remember or not remember, exist in the space between past and present, holding neither too tightly. Some evenings she'd walk up through the trees to the ridgeline, where you could see the valleys spreading out below and the mountains rising behind. The view changed with the seasons, green in summer, gold in fall, white in winter, muddy and hopeful in spring. She'd stand there until the cold drove her back down, or until the stars came out so bright and thick you could navigate by them. This was her life. This had been her life for 17 years. Predictable, solitary, safe. She'd built it deliberately, every choice designed to keep the world at arm's length. No attachments, no vulnerabilities, no doors through which the past could enter. She'd convinced herself it was enough, that this careful, controlled existence was what she deserved, or at least what she could manage. Until the morning Harlan Kitt walked into her diner, the morning started like any other. Vincent at his usual stool, coffee poured, eggs on the grill. 2 truck drivers at the corner table, speaking in low voices about road conditions and delivery schedules. The October air coming through the door carried the smell of wood smoke and fallen leaves. Jude moved through her routine with the same efficiency as always, her mind quiet, her hands busy. Then the door opened and everything changed. The man who entered didn't belong. That was the first thing anyone noticed. His clothes were too fine. A tailored coat over a burgundy velvet vest, dark slacks that had never seen a day of manual labor, shoes that gleamed even in the dull morning light. He was perhaps 60, with silver hair combed back from a narrow face, and eyes that took in the entire room in a single sweeping glance. Behind him came another man, younger, dressed entirely in black, who said nothing and positioned himself near the door like a shadow. The diner went quiet. Even Vincent looked up from his newspaper. The well-dressed man walked to the counter and sat down, 2 stools away from Vincent. He folded his hands on the formica surface and waited. Jude approached with the coffee pot, her face neutral. "Coffee?" she asked. "Please," he said. His voice was smooth, educated, entirely out of place. "And whatever you'd recommend for breakfast. Eggs and bacon, toast, potatoes. That sounds perfect." She poured his coffee and turned back to the grill, aware of his eyes on her. She cracked eggs into the pan, laid bacon in neat strips, worked with the same steady rhythm as always. But something felt wrong. The air in the diner had changed, grown heavier. The truck drivers finished their meal quickly and left. Vincent stayed, but his newspaper remained unread. When the food was ready, Jude set the plate in front of the stranger. He thanked her, picked up his fork, and began to eat with careful, deliberate bites. She refilled Vincent's coffee, wiped down the counter, tried to ignore the prickling sensation at the base of her skull that told her something was coming. The man ate slowly. When he was finished, he set down his fork, took a napkin from the dispenser and wiped his mouth. Then he reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a folded piece of paper. He set it on the counter and slid it toward Jude. "Miss Maddox," he said quietly, "I'd like you to read this." Jude's hands stilled on the coffee pot. She looked at the paper, then at him. "Oh, don't know you. My name is Harlan Kitt. I'm a private investigator from Helena." He paused. "I've been looking for you for 3 months." The words hung in the air. Vincent shifted on his stool, suddenly interested. The man in black by the door remained motionless. "Don't know what you think you'll find here," Jude said, her voice flat. "I'm nobody." "That's not true," Kitt said. He tapped the folded paper. "Please, just read it." Something in his tone, not threatening but urgent, made her reach for the note. She unfolded it with steady hands, though her heart had begun to beat faster. 3 lines written in neat script: Lorelei Maddox, Pinewood Cemetery. She deserves to know. The coffee pot slipped from Jude's hand. It hit the counter hard, coffee splashing across the formica, but didn't break. She stared at the words, reading them again, then again. The name, that name, the name she'd whispered once, 30 years ago, before signing it away. Where did you get this? Her voice came out rough, almost unrecognizable. From someone who hired me to find you, Kitt said. Someone who has questions only you can answer. Jude looked up, her face carefully blank despite the storm building inside her chest. I don't know anyone named Lorelei. Yes, you do. Kitt's eyes held no judgment, only a quiet certainty. She's your daughter. She's 29 years old now, and she's been searching for her birth mother. The world tilted. Jude gripped the counter, her knuckles white. Vincent had gone very still, his coffee forgotten. The man in black by the door watched everything with the patient attention of someone paid to notice details. That was a closed adoption, Jude said, her voice barely above a whisper. Sealed records. There's no way. Lorelei hired a lawyer last year, Kitt interrupted gently. The laws have changed. With enough persistence and the right legal approach, sealed adoptions can be opened. It took time, but she found your name, Judith Ann Maddox. Born in this valley. Last known address, 30 years old. He paused. It took me 3 months to track you here. You've done an excellent job of staying invisible. Jude's mind raced. 30 years. She'd built an entire life around the assumption that the past was sealed, buried, unreachable. That the baby she'd given up would grow up never knowing her name, never asking questions. That they'd both be free of each other. Why now? She asked. Kitt's expression softened with something that might have been sympathy. She's sick, Ms. Maddox. The prognosis isn't certain, but the doctors say it's serious. She has questions about her family medical history. But more than that, he stopped, choosing his words carefully. She wants to meet you, to understand where she came from. She said she's not angry. She just wants to know. The floor seemed to drop away beneath Jude's feet. Sick. Her daughter was sick, and she wanted answers that only Jude could provide. Medical history. Family history. The kinds of things people took for granted when they grew up knowing where they came from. I can't, Jude said. Can't or won't. Both. She turned away, grabbing a rag to wipe up the spilled coffee. Her hands shook. I gave up that right 30 years ago. I made a choice. She got a good family, a good life. That's how it was supposed to be. Life rarely goes the way it's supposed to, Kitt said. He reached into his coat again and pulled out a second piece of paper, this one with a phone number written across it. This is my number. I'm staying at the Pine Lodge in town for the next week. If you change your mind, I won't. You can reach me there. He set the paper next to the first note, then stood. He pulled out his wallet and left 2 20s on the counter, far more than the meal cost. Thank you for breakfast. It was excellent. He walked toward the door, the man in black falling in step behind him. Before leaving, Kitt paused and looked back. For what it's worth, Ms. Maddox, Lorelei isn't looking for an apology. She's not looking to disrupt your life. She just wants to see the face of the woman who gave her life. That's all. Sometimes that's everything. Then they were gone, the door swinging shut behind them, leaving Jude standing behind the counter with 2 pieces of paper and a past she thought she'd buried. Vincent cleared his throat. Jude, don't, she said sharply. Then softer, please, Vincent, don't. He nodded slowly, left his usual payment on the counter, and walked out without another word. Jude stood alone in the empty diner. The morning sun slanted through the windows, dust motes drifting in the light. Everything looked the same as it had an hour ago, but nothing felt the same. She picked up the first note, the one with her daughter's name, and read it again. Lorelei Maddox. She'd chosen that name in the hospital in those 10 minutes before the social worker came. It had been her grandmother's middle name, the only piece of her family she'd wanted to pass on. She'd written it on the birth certificate, signed the papers, and walked away. For 30 years, she'd tried not to think about what happened to that name, to the baby who carried it. Now she knew. Lorelei, 29 years old, sick, searching. Jude folded both notes and slipped them into her apron pocket. She finished cleaning the counter, turned off the grill, and locked the door. The open sign stayed facing out, but she couldn't be here right now. Not with customers, not with questions she couldn't answer. She drove up the mountain faster than usual, the truck bouncing over the rutted road. When she reached her cabin, she didn't check the tree line, didn't look for signs of intrusion. She just went inside, shut the door and sat at her table. The notes lay in front of her. She stared at them until the light faded and the cabin grew cold. Then she lit the stove, made tea she didn't drink, and pulled the trunk from beneath her bed. Inside, beneath the winter clothes and spare blankets, was the wooden box. She lifted it carefully, set it on the table, and opened it. Letters, dozens of them, written over 30 years. Each one addressed to Lorelei, each one never sent. Birthday letters, holiday letters, letters. Marking milestones Jude could only imagine. The first one, written a week after the adoption, began, "Dear Lorelei, I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I need to write it anyway. I need you to know that giving you up was the hardest thing I've ever done, and I did it because I loved you." She'd written one every year on Lorelei's birthday, telling her things, explaining things, trying to give her daughter the mother she deserved, even if it was only on paper, even if the words would never be read. Now those words could be spoken. Lorelei wanted to meet her, wanted to know her. Jude closed the box and sat in the dark, listening to the wind move through the pines outside her cabin. She thought about the girl she'd been at 19, terrified, alone, convinced she was doing the right thing. She thought about the woman she'd become, hard, distant, safe, and she thought about the daughter she'd never known. Sick and searching for answers Jude wasn't sure she could give. The choice had seemed so clear 30 years ago. Now it felt impossibly complicated. She didn't sleep that night. She sat at her table, watching the stars wheel overhead through the window, holding the note with her daughter's name written on it, and wondering if some mistakes could ever truly be left behind. 3 days passed. 3 days of Jude going through the motions, opening the diner, serving meals, closing up, driving home, while her mind circled the same questions over and over. Should she call the number Kitt had left? Should she meet Lorelei? What would she even say? "I'm sorry" seemed both necessary and completely inadequate. "I did what I thought was best" sounded like an excuse. Maybe there were no right words for a conversation like this. The notes stayed in her apron pocket. She'd take them out during slow moments, unfold them, read the words until they were memorized. Lorelei Maddox, Pinewood Cemetery. She deserves to know. Every time she looked at that name, something cracked a little deeper in the armor she'd spent decades building. On the 3rd day, she burned the eggs. Vincent noticed. He sat at his usual stool, watching as Jude scraped blackened scrambled eggs into the trash and started over. She never burned anything. Her hands were always steady, her attention always focused. But today she'd been staring out the window, lost in thought, while the eggs turned to carbon on the grill. "You all right, Jude?" Vincent asked carefully. "Fine," she said, cracking fresh eggs into the pan. "That fellow who came in the other day, I said I'm fine." But her voice cracked on the word, just slightly, and Vincent heard it. He was quiet for a long moment, then spoke in the gentle way of someone who understood that some pain ran too deep for casual comfort. "You know," he said, "I had a chance once to make things right with my son. We'd been estranged for years, my fault mostly. Too proud, too stubborn to admit when I was wrong. Then one day he called, said he wanted to talk. I almost didn't answer. Thought it was easier to keep things the way they were." He paused, took a sip of coffee. "I'm glad I picked up that phone, Jude, because 6 months later, he was gone. Heart attack at 43. If I'd let pride keep me from that conversation, I'd have regretted it every day since." Jude set his plate down carefully. "I'm not sure this is the same thing." "Maybe not," Vincent said. "But regret's regret, however it comes. Just something to consider." He ate his breakfast in silence after that, left his payment on the counter, and walked out. Jude stood behind the grill, spatula in hand, thinking about regret, about the weight of it, about whether she could carry any more than she already did. That evening, she closed the diner early, told herself she needed to do inventory, but really, she just needed to be alone with her thoughts. She locked up at 1 o'clock and drove home, but instead of going inside the cabin, she walked up through the trees, following a path she'd worn over years of solitary evenings. The October air was crisp, the leaves turning gold and red, carpeting the forest floor. She climbed steadily, breathing hard, until she reached the ridgeline. From here the valley spread out below, the town, the highway, the river winding silver through autumn colors, beautiful and distant. She sat on a flat rock and pulled out the wooden box. She'd brought it with her, though she wasn't sure why. Maybe she needed to remember. Maybe she needed to face what she'd spent 30 years avoiding. She opened the box and began reading the letters. Not in order, just randomly, pulling them out and unfolding them. Each one a snapshot of a different year, a different version of herself trying to explain the unexplainable. Dear Lorelei, you're 5 today. I wonder if you like cake. I wonder if you have friends, if you're happy, if the people raising you tell you they love you every day. I hope so. I hope your life is everything I couldn't give you. Dear Lorelei, you're 13 today, teenager now. I remember being 13. It was hard, confusing. I hope you have someone to talk to. I hope you're braver than I was. Dear Lorelei, you're 21 today. An adult. I wonder what you're like, what you want from life, whether you ever think about me, or if I'm just a blank space in your history. Maybe that's better. Maybe it's easier not to know. She read until her eyes burned and her throat ached. 30 letters. 30 years of one-sided conversation with a daughter who existed only in her imagination. A daughter who was now real, grown, sick and searching. When the sun started to sink toward the horizon, Jude carefully folded the letters and returned them to the box. She sat there as the light faded, as the temperature dropped, as the first stars appeared, and she made a decision. She couldn't give Lorelei back the 30 years they'd lost, couldn't undo the choice she'd made or erase the pain it might have caused. But maybe Vincent was right. Maybe some regrets could still be addressed, even if they couldn't be erased. She walked back down the mountain in the dark, her flashlight beam bobbing ahead of her. When she reached the cabin, she went inside, lit the lamp, and sat at the table. The phone number Kitt had left was in her wallet. She'd transferred it there from her apron pocket, though she'd told herself she'd never use it. Now she stared at it. 7 digits that represented a bridge between her past and her present, between who she'd been and who she was, between running and standing still. But before she could talk herself out of it, before fear could freeze her again, there was a sound outside. Faint but distinct, the crunch of tires on gravel, moving slowly. Jude stood, extinguished the lamp and moved to the window. Through the trees she could see headlights, a vehicle on the access road to her cabin, moving without urgency but with clear purpose, not lost, not passing through, coming here. Her pulse quickened. Few people knew where she lived and fewer still would visit after dark. She watched as the vehicle, a dark SUV, pulled into the clearing and stopped. The engine cut off. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the driver's door opened and someone stepped out. Too dark to see clearly, but the silhouette was wrong. Too careful, too deliberate. This wasn't a neighbor dropping by. This was someone who'd come looking. Jude moved away from the window and crossed to the trunk beneath her bed. She pulled it out, opened it, and retrieved what she kept at the bottom, beneath the letters and the memories. A pistol, old but well-maintained. She'd bought it years ago when she first moved into the mountains. A tool, like the axe or the knife. Insurance against the things that lived in the woods, animal and human alike. She checked the chamber, found it loaded, and returned to the window. The figure was walking around the cabin now, slow and methodical, not approaching the door, circling, looking. After what felt like an hour, but was probably only 5 minutes, the figure returned to the SUV, got in, and drove away. Jude waited. Another 30 minutes before moving, making sure they were really gone. Then she grabbed her flashlight and went outside. The tire tracks were fresh, clear in the soft earth of the clearing. She followed them to where the SUV had parked, then walked the perimeter of the cabin, checking for signs of what the intruder had been doing. She found footprints beneath her window. Someone had stood there looking in, not trying to break in, just watching, observing. Back inside, Jude lit the lamp again and sat at the table, the pistol beside her. Her hands weren't shaking. Years of mountain life had taught her to stay calm in the face of danger, but her mind was racing. Who had that been? What did they want? Was it connected to Kitt's visit to Lorelei? She thought about the man in black who'd accompanied Kitt to the diner, silent, watchful. Could he have come back? But why? Kitt had seemed genuine, not threatening. Still, something felt wrong. Jude looked at the phone number again. Maybe it was time to get some answers. But not here, not now, not when someone knew where she lived and had been watching her. She packed a small bag, clothes, the wooden box, the pistol, cash from the coffee can where she kept emergency money. Then she locked the cabin, got in her truck, and drove back down the mountain. Not to the diner, not to town, to a place she knew, a hunting cabin deeper in the woods that belonged to an old-timer who only used it during deer season. She'd stay there tonight, think things through, and in the morning she'd call Harlan Kitt and find out exactly what she'd gotten herself into. Morning came cold and gray. Jude woke in the hunting cabin with a stiff neck and the pistol still within reach. She'd slept in her clothes on a cot that smelled of old canvas and wood smoke, listening to every sound in the forest outside. Nothing had disturbed her, but she'd barely slept anyway. At first light, she drove into town. Not to the diner, too predictable, but to the general store that had a payphone out front. One of the few left in the area, mostly used by hunters and hikers whose cell phones didn't work in the mountains. She parked where she could see the road in both directions, fed quarters into the machine, and dialed the number Kitt had given her. He answered on the second ring. "Harlan Kitt. It's Judith Maddox." A pause, then, "Ms. Maddox, I'm glad you called. Someone was at my cabin last night, watching it. That have anything to do with you?" "What?" Kitt's surprise sounded genuine. No, I haven't been back to your place since we spoke at the diner." "What happened?" Jude described the SUV, the circling, the footprints beneath her window. Kitt listened without interrupting. "That's concerning," he said when she finished. "I can assure you it wasn't me or Tobias. That's my associate, the man who was with me. We've been in town working on background research for Lorelei's case." "What kind of background research?" Another pause. "Can we meet? I'd rather discuss this in person. There are some things about your daughter's situation that are complicated. I don't like complicated. I don't think any of us do," Kitt said. "But complicated is what we have, please. There's a cafe in town, the Bluebird. Can you meet me there in an hour?" Jude thought about it. Public place, middle of town, plenty of witnesses. Safer than most alternatives. 1 hour? Come alone. Agreed. She hung up and stood by the payphone for a moment, watching the street. A few early risers heading to work, a delivery truck unloading at the hardware store. Normal, every day. But underneath that normalcy, something had shifted. Someone was watching her, and she needed to know why. The Bluebird Cafe was a small place with checkered curtains and the smell of fresh-baked bread. Jude arrived early, took a table in the back corner where she could see the entrance, and ordered coffee she didn't want. When Kitt walked in precisely 1 hour after their call, she noted that he was alone, as promised, and that he looked tired, worried even. He sat down across from her, declined the waitress's offer of coffee, and folded his hands on the table. "Thank you for meeting me," he said. "Tell me what's going on." "All of it." Kitt reached into his coat and withdrew a folder. He opened it carefully, as if handling something fragile, and pulled out several photographs. He slid them across the table. "This is Lorelei," he said. Jude's breath caught. The woman in the photograph was in her late 20s, with dark hair pulled back from a face that was, there was no denying it, recognizable. Jude's eyes, her grandmother's smile, her father's strong jawline. Lorelei stood in what looked like a hospital corridor, wearing scrubs and a stethoscope around her neck. She was smiling at the camera, confident and kind. "She's a nurse," Kitt said quietly. "Works in pediatric oncology in Denver. By all accounts, she's excellent at her job. Compassionate, dedicated." Jude couldn't look away from the photograph. This was her daughter, this stranger with her face and her grandmother's name. Real, grown, living a life Jude had never imagined in any detail. "You said she's sick," Jude managed. "Yes." Kitt pulled out another document, this one medical. "She was diagnosed with an autoimmune condition 6 months ago. The doctors need family medical history to determine the best treatment plan. That's when she started the process to find you." Jude scanned the medical report. The terminology was dense, but the prognosis section was clear enough. Treatable but serious, time-sensitive. "She needs to know if there's a history of autoimmune disease in your family," Kitt continued. "But she also—" He stopped, choosing his words carefully. "She wants to meet you. Not to blame you, not to demand anything. She told me she understands that you were young, that circumstances were difficult. She just wants to sit across a table from you once, to hear your voice, to understand where she came from." Jude set down the photograph with a trembling hand. "Why didn't you tell me this at the diner?" "Because I was told to assess the situation first, to make sure you were—" He hesitated. "Stable, safe to approach. Lorelei hired me through a lawyer who insisted on a cautious approach. They didn't want to traumatize you or cause unnecessary pain. Considerate of them," Jude said, her voice flat. "I think she's trying to protect everyone involved, including you." Jude looked at the photograph again. Lorelei in her scrubs, smiling. A woman who helped sick children for a living. A woman who, despite having every reason to be angry, just wanted answers. "There's something else," Kitt said. "Something I didn't mention at the diner because I wasn't sure how it connected. But after what you told me about last night—" "What?" "When I was researching your background, trying to track you down, I found some things about your family, about your father and your grandfather before him." Jude went very still. "What kind of things?" Kitt pulled out more documents. Old newspaper clippings, yellowed with age. Court records. Your grandfather, Samuel Maddox, owned 200 acres on Whisper Ridge, prime land. When he died 35 years ago, there was a legal dispute over ownership. A local family, the Graysons, claimed they had a deed that superseded your grandfather's. The case went to court. The Graysons won. "I know this story," Jude said quietly. "It ruined my father. The legal fees, the shame of losing. It's why—" She stopped. "It's why my family had nothing left when I got pregnant. Why they couldn't afford another mouth to feed. The thing is," Kitt said carefully, "I found evidence that suggests the Grayson deed might have been forged. There were allegations at the time, but nothing was ever proven. My father—" He stopped, pain flashing across his face. "My father was an investigative journalist. He looked into the Grayson family 15 years ago, wrote an article about environmental violations on their land. 3 weeks after the article published, he died in a car accident. Single-vehicle collision, no witnesses. The police called it driver error." Jude leaned back in her chair, processing. "You think it wasn't an accident?" "I think my father found something he wasn't supposed to find. And I think whatever he found might be connected to what happened to your family." Kitt's voice was steady, but his hands had tightened on the folder. "When I started researching your background, I found a cassette tape in my father's storage unit. It's a recorded interview with your father, done about a year before my father died. What does it say?" "I haven't listened to all of it yet, but I heard enough to know your father was afraid. Not just of losing the land, but of what the Graysons might do to protect their secrets." He looked at her directly. "Ms. Maddox, I think the person who was watching your cabin last night might be connected to the Grayson family. I think bringing you back into the open, making you visible again, might have triggered something." Jude's mind raced. The Graysons— She remembered the name from her childhood, spoken with bitterness and resignation by her father. A wealthy family who controlled much of the valley, who had their fingers in every business and every politician's pocket. She'd been too young to understand the details, too focused on her own problems to pay attention to her father's battles. But now it seemed those battles weren't as finished as she'd thought. "You're saying that finding me, arranging this meeting with Lorelei, might have put a target on my back." "I'm saying it's possible," Kitt said. "And I'm saying that if the Graysons are involved, we need to be very careful about how we proceed." Jude looked at the photograph of her daughter again. Lorelei, who just wanted to meet her birth mother, who had no idea that reaching out might have opened a door to something dangerous. "Does Lorelei know about any of this? About the Graysons? About your father?" "No," Kitt said. "I haven't told her. I didn't want to frighten her, and I wasn't sure there was a real connection until you told me about last night." Jude made a decision. "I want to hear that tape, the one with my father." Kitt nodded. "I have it with me. Tobias is at the motel. He has cassette player we can use. Then let's go." They stood, left money for the coffee, and walked out into the cold morning. As they reached Kitt's car, Jude glanced down the street. Dark SUV was parked 3 blocks away, engine running. Too far to see the driver, but close enough to be watching. "Don't look," she said quietly to Kitt, "but we're being followed." Kitt's stride didn't change, but she saw his jaw tighten. "The SUV?" "Yeah. Then we'd better move quickly. Get in." They drove to the Pine Lodge Motel on the edge of town, Kitt checking his mirror every few seconds. The SUV followed at a distance, not bothering to hide. When they pulled into the motel parking lot, it drove past, then circled back and parked across the street. "Whoever they are," Kitt said, "they want us to know they're watching." "Good," Jude said grimly. "Let them watch." They went inside to room 12, where Tobias was waiting. Up close, without the shadows of the diner, he looked younger than Jude had thought, maybe 40, with a scarred face and careful eyes. He nodded at her but didn't offer his hand. "Miss Maddox," he said simply. "Call me Jude." Kitt explained the situation quickly, while Tobias set up an old cassette player on the desk. He inserted the tape, and after a moment of crackling static, a voice emerged. Older, rougher than Jude remembered, but unmistakable. Her father's voice, the voice that came through the speakers, belonged to a ghost. Jude hadn't heard her father speak in 30 years, hadn't let herself think about him much, because thinking hurt too much. But there he was, preserved on magnetic tape, speaking from beyond death. "My name is Thomas Maddox. Today is September 15th, 2009. I'm recording this statement for Edmund Kitt of the Mountain Tribune because I believe my life may be in danger. And someone needs to know the truth about the Grayson family." Kitt leaned forward, his face drawn. That was his father's voice on the other end, asking questions, guiding the interview. 2 dead men having a conversation about secrets that outlived them both. "The land dispute started when my father died," Thomas Maddox continued. "The deed was clear, 200 acres on Whisper Ridge, passed down from his father before him. But Vernon Grayson showed up at the courthouse with a different deed, older, that claimed the land had been sold to his family in 1947. It was a lie. My grandfather never sold that land. He loved it too much." Edmund Kitt's voice, patient and professional. "Do you have evidence the deed was forged?" "I have questions no one wants to answer. Like why the deed appeared 3 weeks after my father's funeral. Like why the paper it was written on looks old, but the ink doesn't. Like why the signature doesn't match my grandfather's writing on any other document from that time." A long pause. "But I couldn't prove it in court. The Graysons had better lawyers, better connections. The judge ruled in their favor. What happened after you lost the case?" "Everything fell apart. The legal fees bankrupted us. I lost the house, lost my reputation. My wife left. Couldn't handle the shame of being married to a Maddox. Then other things started happening. My truck was vandalized. Someone shot my dog. Notes left on my door, warning me to stop talking about the Graysons." His voice turned bitter. "I got the message. But you didn't stop." "No, I talked to people quietly. Found out we weren't the first family the Graysons had done this to. Back in the 70s, there were 3 other land disputes, all decided in their favor, all under suspicious circumstances. One of those families, the Brennans, their oldest son disappeared right before the court date. Never found. Case went uncontested. You're suggesting the Graysons were involved in that disappearance. I'm saying it's a hell of a coincidence. The tape crackled with static. Then Thomas spoke again, his voice lower. There's something else. My brother, Raymond, he disappeared in 1985, 40 years ago. The police said he probably got lost in the mountains, that his body would turn up eventually. It never did. You think the Graysons were involved in your brother's disappearance? Raymond was the one who found the first evidence that the deed was forged. He was going to take it public, file a formal complaint. 3 days before he was supposed to meet with a lawyer, he vanished. A long, shaking breath. I think Vernon Grayson killed my brother. I think he's gotten away with it for 40 years. And I think if I keep pushing, I'll disappear too. Then why are you doing this interview? Silence, then. Because someone needs to know the truth. And because my daughter, his voice broke. I have a daughter, Judith. I pushed her away, told her to leave the valley, made her think I didn't want her. But the truth is I was trying to save her life. The Graysons knew I had a family. If anything happens to me, they might come after her. She needs to stay away from this place. She needs to stay hidden. Jude's throat tightened. She'd spent 30 years believing her father cast her out because she'd shamed the family. But he'd been trying to protect her. The interview continued for another 10 minutes, Thomas providing more details, more names, more suspicious coincidences. Then Edmund Kitt's voice. What do you want me to do with this information? Investigate it. Write about it. Make enough noise that the Graysons can't just make me disappear. Maybe if it's public I'll be safe. A bitter laugh. Or maybe I'm already dead and just don't know it yet. The tape ended with a click. The room was silent, except for the hum of the motel's air conditioning unit. Kitt spoke first. My father died 6 weeks after that interview. He'd started digging into the Grayson family's business dealings, looking into their land acquisitions. Then one night his car went off a mountain road. The brakes had failed. Did they investigate? Jude asked, her voice rough. Briefly. The official conclusion was mechanical failure. But my father was meticulous about vehicle maintenance. Those brakes had been serviced 2 weeks before the accident. Kitt's hands were clenched on the desk. I was 28. I couldn't accept that it was just bad luck. I tried to investigate on my own, but I didn't have the resources or the knowledge. Eventually, I let it go. Built a career as a private investigator. Told myself I'd moved on. But you hadn't, Tobias said quietly. No, and when this case came across my desk, find Judith Maddox, arrange a meeting with her daughter, I recognized the name. I pulled my father's old files and found the tape. That's when I knew this wasn't just a reunion case. It was connected to something bigger. Jude stood and walked to the window. The dark SUV was still parked across the street, a reminder that the past wasn't as buried as she'd hoped. You think finding me brought the Graysons back into the picture? I think Lorelei's search opened a door, Kitt said. When she hired a lawyer to unseal the adoption records to track down her birth mother, she would have had to dig into official documents. Birth certificates, hospital records, family histories. If the Graysons have been monitoring the Maddox name all these years, they would have been notified, Tobias finished. Which means they know someone's looking into your background. And they want to know why. Jude turned from the window. My daughter has no idea what she walked into. No, Kitt agreed. She just wanted to meet her birth mother. She couldn't have known about any of this. Is she safe? If the Graysons know about her, right now I think you're their focus, Tobias said. He'd been quiet through most of the conversation, but now he spoke with the authority of someone who'd dealt with dangerous people before. They're watching you because they want to know, what you might do. Your daughter is in Denver, living her normal life. As long as she stays there, she should be safe. Should be, Jude repeated. The words weren't comforting. Kitt closed the folder with the photographs and documents. We have a decision to make. We can call off the meeting with Lorelei, tell her the situation's complicated and it's not safe right now. Or do we go through with it, Jude said. But carefully. That's the other option. But if we do this, we need to be smart. We need to understand what we're dealing with. He looked at Tobias. Can you find out who's in that SUV? Who they work for? I can try. But if they're professional surveillance, they won't be easy to identify. Do what you can. Kitt turned back to Jude. What about you? Are you willing to meet Lorelei, knowing what we know now? Jude thought about the photograph. About her daughter's smile, her kind eyes, her life spent helping sick children. About the letters in the wooden box, 30 years of words never spoken. About her father's voice on that tape, admitting he'd pushed her away to keep her safe. Maybe it was time to stop running. Maybe it was time to face the things she'd been hiding from, even if it was dangerous. I'll meet her, Jude said. But not here. Somewhere neutral, somewhere the Graysons won't expect. And I want to know everything about them first, who they are now, what they're capable of, what they're afraid of. If I'm going to walk back into this mess, I'm going in prepared. Kitt nodded slowly. There's a county records office in Helena. Everything the Graysons own, every business dealing, every legal document, it's all public record. I can pull their files, build a complete picture. How long will that take? 2 days, maybe 3. Then we have time. Jude picked up her jacket. I'm not going back to my cabin, and I'm not staying in town where they can watch me. I know places in the mountains where no one will find me. We should stay in contact, Kitt said, in case something changes. The payphone at the general store. Call there at noon every day. If I can, I'll be there to answer. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was something. Jude left the motel through the back exit, circled through the woods to where she'd parked her truck several blocks away, and drove out of town on back roads. In her mirror, no headlights followed. She spent that night in the hunting cabin again, and the next day drove even deeper into the mountains, to a place she'd discovered years ago, an abandoned fire lookout tower, accessible only by an overgrown hiking trail. She carried supplies up the trail, along with the wooden box and the gun. From the tower she could see for miles in every direction. No one could approach without being seen. On the second day at noon, she hiked back down to where she'd hidden her truck and drove to town. She was at the payphone when it rang. It's Kitt. I've been going through the records. There's something you need to know about the Grayson family. What? They're not just wealthy landowners anymore. They've expanded into dozens of businesses, construction, real estate, mining operations. They're worth hundreds of millions. And, he paused, Vernon Grayson died 10 years ago. The family is now run by his son, Warren. The name hit Jude like cold water. Warren Grayson. You know him? He was a few years older than me. We went to the same school. She remembered a tall boy with cruel eyes, someone the other kids feared and avoided. He was mean even then, entitled, dangerous. Well, he's all of those things now, but with unlimited resources. I found something else in the records, something that connects directly to your father's interview. What? Your uncle, Raymond, the one who disappeared in 1985. I found a death certificate filed last year, 40 years after he vanished. It says his remains were found on Grayson property during a construction project. Cause of death listed as undetermined. Jude's hand tightened on the phone. They found his body on Grayson land. Yes, which means everything your father suspected was probably true. The Graysons made your uncle disappear, and now, 40 years later, evidence has surfaced. Why would they file a death certificate? Why not just quietly rebury the remains? That's what I wondered. Then I found this. A lawsuit filed by the Maddox family estate against the Grayson Corporation, seeking damages for wrongful death. It was filed 6 months ago, but there's no Maddox family left. My father's dead. She stopped. Who filed it? A law firm in Denver, Kitt said quietly. The same firm Lorelei used to find you. The world tilted. Jude gripped the payphone like it was the only solid thing left. Lorelei filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the Graysons. Not exactly, Kitt said, his voice careful. The lawsuit was filed by a lawyer who specializes in estate law. It claims to represent the Maddox family's interest, but Lorelei's name isn't on any of the documents. I think someone is using the discovery of your uncle's remains as leverage against the Graysons. And I think they might be using Lorelei's search for you as a way to gather information. You're saying this whole thing, the medical story, finding me, arranging the meeting. It's not really about Lorelei wanting to meet her birth mother. I don't know what it's about, Kitt admitted. but there are too many coincidences. Lorelei starts searching for you right around the same time this lawsuit is filed. Your uncle's remains are suddenly discovered after 40 years. And now the Graysons are watching you." He paused. "I think we've been played, Miss Maddox. I think someone hired me to find you for reasons that have nothing to do with a family reunion." Jude's mind raced through the implications. "Who hired you? You said it came through a lawyer." "A firm in Denver, yes. They sent the contract and payment by courier, no direct contact. Very professional, very anonymous. They provided Lorelei's information, her medical records, the story about her wanting to meet you. I had no reason to doubt any of it." His voice hardened. "But I'm doubting it now. Can you verify whether Lorelei even knows about me, whether she really did unseal the adoption records?" "Tobias is working on that now. He has contacts in Denver who can look into it quietly." Jude looked down the street. The SUV wasn't there today, but that didn't mean she wasn't being watched. "I need to think. Call me tomorrow, same time." She hung up and stood there for a long moment, trying to process what she'd learned. If Kitt was right, then this entire situation was a setup. But setup for what? To draw her out of hiding, to use her as leverage in a lawsuit, to finish what the Graysons had started 40 years ago when they'd made her uncle disappear. She thought about her father's voice on the tape, warning that if anything happened to him, the Graysons might come after her. He'd pushed her away to keep her safe, and she'd spent 30 years hidden, invisible, untouchable, until now. She drove back toward the mountains, but took a different route this time, one that led past the county courthouse. On impulse, she parked and went inside. The records office was open, a small room with filing cabinets and a single clerk who barely looked up when Jude entered. "Help you?" the woman asked. "I'd like to see property records for the Whisper Ridge area, specifically land that used to belong to Samuel Maddox." The clerk's eyebrows rose slightly. "That's going back a ways. What year?" 1985 through 1990, when the ownership transferred to the Grayson family. "That'll be in the archives. Give me a few minutes." While the clerk disappeared into the back, Jude looked around the office. Old maps hung on the walls, showing the valley as it had been decades ago. She found Whisper Ridge, traced the boundary lines with her finger. Her grandfather's land had been prime territory, water access, good timber, a view of the entire valley. Worth fighting for, worth killing for, apparently. The clerk returned with a thick folder. "Here you go. Maddox to Grayson, 1989. Court-ordered transfer after the deed dispute." Jude took the folder to a table and began reading. The legal language was dense, but the story was clear enough. Samuel Maddox's deed, dated 1952. Vernon Grayson's deed, dated 1947, claiming prior ownership. Her grandfather's signature on his deed looked genuine. She recognized the strong, angular handwriting from letters she'd seen as a child. The signature. On Grayson's deed, supposedly also her grandfather's, signing away the land 5 years earlier, looked similar but not identical. Rounder, less confident, forged, just as her father had suspected, but the court had ruled in Grayson's favor anyway. The judge's decision cited the earlier date of the Grayson deed as the determining factor, dismissing concerns about the signature's authenticity as insufficient evidence of fraud. Jude photographed every page with the cheap camera she'd bought at the general store, then returned the folder. The clerk barely glanced at her as she left. Back in her truck, Jude sat for a moment, thinking. She had copies of the forged deed. Now, evidence her father had never been able to properly document. But what good was evidence against a family that could make people disappear? She needed allies, people who understood how to fight powerful enemies, people who couldn't be bought or intimidated. Tobias. Kitt was a private investigator, skilled at finding information. But Tobias was something else. She'd seen it in the way he carried himself, the careful attention he paid to threats, the competence that came from years of dealing with dangerous situations. He was former law enforcement, Kitt had mentioned. Maybe he still had connections. That evening from the fire tower, Jude watched the sun set over the valley. The mountains turned purple and gold, the shadows stretching long, beautiful and indifferent. The land didn't care who owned it, who fought over it, who died for it. The land just endured. The next day at noon, she was at the payphone again. Kitt called precisely on time. "Tobias verified the medical records," he said without preamble. "They're real. Lorelei Brennan, that's her adoptive name, was diagnosed with an autoimmune condition 6 months ago. She does work as a pediatric nurse in Denver. Everything about her checks out. But she never hired a lawyer to find you. Tobias contacted her directly, said he was following up on a family history inquiry. She was confused, said she'd never tried to unseal her adoption records. Said she's always known she was adopted, but was never particularly interested in finding her birth parents." He paused. "She has no idea anyone's been looking for you on her behalf." The confirmation settled in Jude's chest like a stone. So, someone used her name, her medical condition, to create a cover story for finding me. Yes, the law firm that filed the wrongful death lawsuit? That's my guess. They needed a Maddox family member to have standing in the case. They couldn't use your uncle, he's dead. They couldn't use your father, also dead. But you're alive, and you're Samuel Maddox's granddaughter. You'd have legal standing to pursue claims against the Graysons. But I didn't file any lawsuit. No, but they might be planning to approach you once they'd located you, or, his voice turned grim, they might be planning to use your existence as leverage without your consent. Either way, they needed to find you first. Who are they? This law firm? Tobias is digging into that now. The firm has a legitimate practice, mostly estate and property law, but some of their clients are shell corporations, difficult to trace. We're working on it. Jude watched a truck drive past on the street, a rancher she recognized heading to the feed store. Normal life, continuing on while she stood at a payphone learning that her entire existence had been weaponized without her knowledge. "There's something else," Kitt said. "Tobias followed the SUV that's been watching you, tracked it to a private security company based in Billings. They do executive protection, surveillance, investigations, the kind of work corporations hire for when they want something done quietly and legally. The Graysons hired them. Almost certainly, which means they know you're in the area, they know I've made contact, and they're trying to figure out what you're planning to do." "I'm not planning to do anything," Jude said. "I just want to be left alone." "I don't think that's an option anymore." Kitt's voice was gentle but firm. "You're a potential witness to historical crimes, a legal heir with standing in a major lawsuit, and a threat to a very powerful family. They're not going to just forget about you. Then what do I do? You meet with Tobias tonight. He has something he wants to show you, evidence his investigation turned up. Something he thinks might change your understanding of this whole situation." "Where?" "There's an old ranger station off Highway 12, about 40 miles north. It's been abandoned for years. Tobias will be there at 8 o'clock. Jude hesitated, meeting someone in an isolated location at night was textbook dangerous. But if Tobias had information that could help her make sense of all this, she needed to hear it. "I'll be there," she said, "but tell him to come alone." "He will," the call ended. Jude hung up the phone and looked at her reflection in the general store's window. The woman looking back was older, harder than the girl who'd fled into the mountains 30 years ago. But underneath the weathered exterior, she was still the same person, still running, still hiding, still trying to outpace a past that kept finding her. Maybe it was time to stop running. That evening, as the sun dropped behind the mountains, Jude drove north on Highway 12. The road wound through dense forest, past logging roads and primitive campgrounds. She found the ranger station where Kitt had described it, a small log structure set back from the highway, windows dark, weeds growing through the parking area. Tobias's vehicle was already there, a nondescript sedan parked in the shadows. She pulled up beside it and got out, her hand resting near the pistol in her jacket pocket. Tobias emerged from the ranger station, holding a flashlight. Miss Maddox, thank you for coming. What did you find? He gestured toward the building. Better if I show you. Inside, the ranger station smelled of dust and old wood. Tobias had set up a battery-powered lantern on a desk, beside which lay a leather-bound folder. He opened it carefully. This is evidence my father collected before he died, Tobias said. He was investigating the Grayson family alongside Edmund Kitt. When Edmund was killed, my father, who was a federal investigator at the time, continued the investigation quietly. He believed Edmund's death wasn't an accident. You never mentioned your father before. I don't talk about him often. Tobias's face was unreadable. He died 5 years ago. Heart attack officially. But he was 52 years old and in perfect health. He opened the folder. He left me everything he'd collected, told me that if anything happened to him, I should make sure the truth came out eventually. The folder contained photographs, documents, handwritten notes. Tobias spread them across the desk. Your Uncle Raymond didn't just disappear. He was murdered. My father found witness statements from 2 loggers who saw Vernon Grayson and 2 other men taking Raymond into the woods at gunpoint. The witnesses were too afraid to go to the police. Vernon Grayson controlled the sheriff at the time. But they told my father years later when they thought it was safe. Jude stared at the witness statements, the words blurring. Her uncle murdered, her father's suspicions confirmed. There's more, Tobias continued. Vernon Grayson didn't just steal land. He ran an illegal logging operation for decades, harvesting timber from federal land and bribing officials to look the other way. The environmental violations Edmund Kitt reported? They were just the surface. Underneath was a network of corruption that went all the way to the state level. He pulled out another document, a financial ledger. This shows payments to judges, sheriffs, politicians, everyone who could make problems disappear. Vernon paid them all. Where did you get this? My father obtained it through a confidential source inside the Grayson organization. Someone who was tired of watching the family get away with crimes. Tobias met her eyes. That source disappeared 3 years ago. Never found. Jesus, Jude whispered. Warren Grayson is more careful than his father was, but he's just as ruthless. He's expanded the family business, made it look legitimate, buried the corruption under layers of shell companies and legal maneuvers. But the foundation is still rotten. Tobias closed the folder. The wrongful death lawsuit filed on behalf of your uncle. It's not really about getting justice for Raymond. It's about forcing the Graysons to settle, to pay out millions to make the case go away before any of this evidence becomes public. Who's behind the lawsuit? That's what we haven't been able to determine. The law firm is real, but they're representing someone who doesn't want to be identified. Someone with knowledge of the Grayson family's crimes and access to evidence that could destroy them. Jude thought about it. Someone who knew family secrets. Someone with motivation to hurt the Graysons. Someone who'd stayed hidden for decades, just like she had. My grandmother, she said suddenly. Tobias looked at her sharply. Your grandmother is dead. That's what I thought. That's what everyone thinks. But what if she's not? What if she's been hiding just like me, waiting for the right moment? Why would she hide? Because my father told her to. Because the Graysons were dangerous and she needed to disappear. Jude's mind raced through the possibilities. She would have known everything, about the forged deed, about Raymond's murder, about all of it. She would have had motivation to see the Graysons punished. And she would have known about me, would have known I existed, even though I'd been gone for 30 years. Tobias considered this. If your grandmother is alive, if she's behind the lawsuit, then finding you wasn't about a family reunion. It was about confirming you could be a witness, an heir, someone with legal standing, and she used Lorelei as a cover story, knowing I'd respond to the idea of meeting my daughter. Jude felt a surge of anger mixed with something else, hope, maybe. My grandmother's name was Iris Maddox. Can you find out if she's alive? I can try. What was her last known location? Here in the valley. But that was 30 years ago. Tobias pulled out his phone, made a few notes. I'll run a search, see if there's any trace of her, death records, financial activity, anything. And if she's alive, Then we find her, Tobias said. Before the Graysons do. 2 days later, Tobias called with news that changed everything. Jude was at the fire tower when her cheap burner phone rang. One of 3 she'd bought, cycling through them to avoid being tracked. She answered on the second ring. I found her, Tobias said without preamble. Your grandmother. Iris Maddox. She's alive! Jude sat down hard on the tower's wooden floor. Where? Northern Montana, near the Canadian border, living under a different name. But I tracked her through property records and cross-referenced with age and physical description. It's her, I'm certain. How did you find her? The lawsuit gave me a starting point. I traced the payments to the law firm back through several shell companies until I found a property trust. The trust owns a cabin in Flathead County, and the trustee is listed as Iris Brennan. Brennan was your grandmother's maiden name. She's been there for at least 20 years. Iris Brennan. Iris Maddox. Alive. The woman Jude had believed dead, the only person who'd ever truly understood her, who'd taught her to read the mountains and survive on her own. The grandmother who hadn't fought for her when she was cast out, who'd let her walk away into the wilderness. Or had she? I need to see her, Jude said. I thought you might. I've arranged transportation. There's a private airfield outside Helena. Small planes, no security, no passenger manifests. We can be in Flathead County by tomorrow afternoon. We?
Kitt and I are coming with you.
If the Graysons are watching, and they are, we need to move carefully. This needs to look like you're still in the area, still predictable. He paused. I've hired someone to drive your truck around Whisper Ridge for the next few days. Create a pattern. Keep their surveillance focused here while we slip out. It was a good plan. A careful plan. The kind of plan you made when you understood that powerful people were hunting you. What about Lorelei? Jude asked. The real Lorelei. Is she safe? For now. She has no idea any of this is happening. As far as she knows, she's just living her life in Denver. No one's approached her. No one's threatened her. We're monitoring the situation. Good. Jude looked out over the valley, at the mountains rolling away to the horizon. When do we leave? Tonight. 10 o'clock. I'll pick you up at the trailhead below the fire tower. Bring only what you need, the call ended. Jude sat for a long moment processing. Her grandmother was alive. After 30 years of believing she was alone in the world, she had family. Someone who knew the truth about everything, who'd been fighting in her own way. But there was something else, something that didn't quite fit. If Iris had been alive all this time, why hadn't she reached out? Why let Jude believe she was dead? What had she been doing for 3 decades? The questions multiplied, but there would be time for answers. Right now she needed to prepare. She packed light, a change of clothes, the wooden box with the letters, the pistol, cash, the photographs of the forged deed. Everything else she left behind. The fire tower had been a good hiding place, but it was time to move forward, not hide. That night, precisely at 10, Tobias pulled up to the trailhead in an unmarked sedan. Kitt was in the passenger seat. Jude climbed into the back without a word. They drove north through the darkness, staying off the main highways, taking back roads that wound through forest and farmland. No one spoke much. The tension in the car was thick, not hostile, but anticipatory. They were heading toward answers, and none of them were certain they'd like what they found. The airfield was exactly as Tobias described, a single runway, a few hangars, and a pilot who asked no questions. They boarded a small Cessna as the first light of dawn touched the eastern sky. The flight took 3 hours, following the spine of the Rockies north, the mountains gradually giving way to flatter terrain and endless forests. They landed at a private strip outside Kalispell. Another car was waiting, this one arranged by Tobias through contacts Jude didn't ask about. They drove east, deeper into remote country where the roads turned to gravel and the houses grew sparse. It's another hour from here, Tobias said, studying a map. The cabin is accessible only by a logging road. She's chosen her location carefully, isolated, defensible, hard to find. Sounds like her, Jude said quietly. Her grandmother had always been practical, always thinking 3 steps ahead. If she'd been hiding from the Graysons for 30 years, of course she'd picked a place where she could see them coming. The logging road was rough, barely more than 2 ruts through the trees. They drove slowly, the car bouncing over roots and rocks. After 20 minutes, they emerged into a clearing. The cabin sat at the far end, backed against a steep hillside. It was larger than Jude's, more substantial. Log construction, solar panels on the roof, a satellite dish, serious security. Cameras mounted at the corners. Motion sensors visible along the perimeter. "She's been preparing for something," Kitt observed. As they approached, the front door opened. A woman stepped onto the porch, holding a rifle. Not aiming it, just holding it. Ready. Iris Maddox was 82 years old, but she stood straight and steady. Her hair was completely white, pulled back in a braid. Her face was deeply lined, but her eyes were sharp, the same grey-blue eyes Jude saw in the mirror every morning. She wore jeans and a flannel shirt, boots that had seen decades of use. She looked at Jude for a long moment, then lowered the rifle. "Took you long enough, girl," she said. Jude got out of the car slowly. 30 years collapsed into nothing. She was 19 again, standing in her grandmother's kitchen, learning how to gut a fish. She was 12, following Iris through the forest, learning to read tracks. She was 7, sitting on this same woman's lap, listening to stories about the mountains. "You let me think you were dead," Jude said. "I know." Iris's voice was rough with age, but steady. "Come inside. We have a lot to talk about." The interior of the cabin was organized like a command center. One wall was covered with maps, photographs, documents, years of research carefully arranged. Newspaper clippings about the Grayson family, financial records, legal documents, a timeline spanning 40 years. Kitt and Tobias stood back, letting Jude and Iris face each other in the center of the room. "Why?" Jude asked. "Why did you disappear? Why did you let me believe—" "Because you needed to disappear too," Iris interrupted. "And you wouldn't have left if you knew I was still here. You would have stayed, tried to help, and they would have killed you." She gestured to the wall. "After Raymond was murdered, after your father lost the court case, Vernon Grayson made it clear that any Maddox who caused trouble would end up in the ground. Your father understood. He sent you away to save your life. And you—" "I left a week after you did. Faked my death, a hiking accident in the mountains, body never recovered. It wasn't hard. People disappear in these mountains all the time." Iris moved to the wall, touched a photograph of Raymond. "But I didn't just hide. I've been gathering evidence. Everything the Graysons have done, everyone they've hurt. Waiting for the right time to use it." "The wrongful death lawsuit," Tobias said. Iris nodded. "Raymond's remains were found during construction last year. The Graysons tried to keep it quiet, but the coroner was honest, filed a proper death certificate, listed the location where the body was found. That gave me the opening I needed. Evidence of murder, 40 years old, on Grayson property." "You hired the law firm," Kitt said. "Used Lorelei's search as cover to find Jude." "Yes." Iris looked at Jude, her expression unreadable. "I needed to know if you were alive, if you could testify if it came to that. I hired Kitt because his father worked with your father, because I trusted the connection. I didn't know about Lorelei, your daughter, until the lawyer suggested using her as a reason to find you. It seemed," she paused, "it seemed like a sign, a way to give you something back, even if everything else was about the Graysons." "Except the medical story was a lie," Jude said. "Lorelei never searched for me. You manipulated everything I did. No apology, no justification. Just fact. I've spent 30 years preparing to destroy the Grayson family. I've gathered evidence of fraud, murder, corruption, environmental crimes. I've identified witnesses, documented everything. But I needed a legal heir to give the case legitimacy. You're Samuel Maddox's granddaughter. You have standing." Jude felt anger building. "You used me. Used my daughter's name. Created a fake story about her being sick, about wanting to meet me just so you could—" "What?" "Win a lawsuit." "Not win a lawsuit," Iris said sharply. "Bring justice. For Raymond. For your father. For every family the Graysons destroyed." She pointed at the wall. "Do you know how many people they've hurt? How many lives they've ruined? 3 families forced off their land. 2 men who disappeared asking the wrong questions. Dozens of workers injured or killed in unsafe conditions. And they've never paid for any of it. That's not my fight, Jude said. It became your fight the moment you were born a Maddox. Iris's voice softened slightly. I know you wanted to leave all this behind. I know you built a life away from the valley, away from our family's mess. But running doesn't make you safe. The Graysons know you exist now. They know you could be a threat. Whether you fight or hide, they'll come for you eventually. The truth of it settled in Jude's chest. Iris was right. The surveillance, the watching, that was just the beginning. As long as the Graysons saw her as a potential problem, she'd never be truly safe. What do you want from me? Jude asked quietly. Iris walked to a desk and picked up a folder. I want you to read this. It's everything I've prepared. The evidence, the witness statements, the financial records. I want you to understand what we're up against. And then I want you to decide if you're willing to stand up and be counted as a Maddox. She held out the folder. Jude took it, felt the weight of it in her hands. 30 years of work. 30 years of her grandmother's life dedicated to one purpose. And if I say no, Jude asked, then you walk away. I'll continue on my own. File the lawsuit, take it as far as I can. But without you, without a living family member to give legitimacy to the claims, the case is weaker. The Graysons' lawyers will tear it apart. Iris met her eyes. I can't force you to fight. I can only show you what's at stake and hope you make the right choice. Jude opened the folder and began to read. Page after page of carefully documented crimes. Photographs of her uncle's remains. Witness statements describing his murder. Financial records showing bribes to judges and sheriffs. Environmental reports detailing illegal logging that destroyed watersheds and poisoned streams. A pattern of corruption and violence spanning 4 decades. And at the center of it all, the Grayson family, wealthy, powerful, untouchable. Until now, maybe. Jude looked up from the folder. You said the Graysons know I exist, that they're watching me. Yes, Tobias confirmed. They've had surveillance on you since Kitt made contact. Then they'll know I've disappeared. They'll be looking for me. Probably, Iris said, which means we don't have much time. The lawsuit is filed, the evidence is ready to be submitted to the court. But before that happens, the Graysons will try to make a deal. They'll offer money, lots of it, to make the case go away quietly. And if we don't take the deal, then it goes to trial. Everything becomes public. The family's reputation is destroyed. Criminal investigations follow. People go to prison. Iris's smile was cold. Everything Vernon and Warren Grayson built collapses. Kitt spoke up. There's a problem with that plan. A trial takes time, months, maybe years. During that time, the Graysons will do everything they can to intimidate witnesses, suppress evidence, make problems disappear. Just like they've always done. I know, Iris said. That's why I have a backup plan. A way to force their hand quickly before they can react. What kind of backup plan? Jude asked. Iris walked to a safe mounted in the wall, opened it, and pulled out a small recording device. I have something the Graysons don't know exists. A recording made by Vernon Grayson himself 25 years ago. He was drinking, talking to someone he thought he could trust. Bragging about how he'd killed Raymond Maddox, how he'd forged the deed, how he'd paid off half the county to cover his crimes. She held up the device. This recording is a confession to murder. If it becomes public, there's no deal the Graysons can make, no amount of money they can pay to make it go away. Warren Grayson will go to prison for conspiracy. After the fact, the family's assets will be seized. Everything collapses. Why haven't you released it already? Tobias asked. Because I needed the lawsuit in place first. Legal structure to ensure the evidence is heard in court, not just dismissed as the ravings of an old woman. And I needed, she looked at Jude, I needed family. Someone who could stand up in court and say, I'm a Maddox, and I demand justice for what was done to my uncle, my grandfather, my father. The room was silent. Jude looked at the recording device, at the wall of evidence, at her grandmother's face. 82 years old, still fighting, still refusing to let evil win just because it wore a suit and had money. They killed your father, didn't they? Jude said quietly. It wasn't just a broken heart from losing the land. They murdered him. Iris's face tightened. I can't prove it. He died of what they called natural causes, heart failure. But 2 days before he died, he told me Warren Grayson had threatened him. Told him to stop talking about the past, or there would be consequences. She touched a photograph on the wall. Thomas Maddox, younger, happier. I believe they killed him. But I have no evidence, no witnesses. Nothing that would hold up in court. But you have evidence for Raymond. Yes, enough to put Warren Grayson in prison for covering up his father's crime. Enough to destroy the family. Iris closed the safe. The question is whether you're willing to help me do it. Jude looked at Kitt and Tobias. What do you two think?
Kitt spoke first.
My father died investigating the Graysons. I've spent years wondering if I could have done something, if I could have helped him. This is a chance to finish what he started. I'm in, Tobias nodded. I've seen too many powerful people escape justice. If we can take down the Graysons, show that no one is above the law, it matters. I'm in too. 3 people, all with their own reasons for wanting the Graysons to pay. And Jude, holding a folder full of evidence, standing at a crossroads. She thought about the life she'd built, quiet, solitary, safe. She thought about the diner at the base of Whisper Ridge, the cabin in the mountains, the routines that had sustained her for 17 years. She'd run from the valley once, from her family's pain and shame and loss. But her father had died thinking she was safe. Her uncle had died trying to expose the truth. Her grandmother had spent 30 years gathering evidence, preparing for this moment. Maybe it was time to stop running. Maybe it was time to be a Maddox. Tell me the plan, Jude said. All of it. How do we bring them down? Iris smiled, a fierce, satisfied smile. We make them come to us. We let them know we have the recording, that we're ready to release it. They'll panic, try to negotiate, offer money, and when they come to make the deal, she paused, we'll have federal agents waiting. Tobias has contacts in the FBI who've been wanting to investigate the Graysons for years. This gives them probable cause, justification for raids and arrests. It's a trap, Kitt said. Yes, Iris agreed. A trap 40 years in the making. The plan was simple in concept, but complex in execution. Over the next 2 days, Iris laid out every detail, while Jude, Kitt, and Tobias absorbed the magnitude of what they were attempting. The key, Iris explained, spreading maps across her dining table, is controlling the timing. We need to give the Graysons enough information to make them act, but not enough to let them plan a proper defense. They need to feel urgent, desperate even. Tobias had already contacted his former colleagues at the FBI, agents who'd been watching the Grayson family for years, but lacked the evidence for formal investigation. A recording of Vernon Grayson confessing to murder would change that calculus immediately. Special Agent Monica Chen is heading up the team, Tobias said, showing them a photo on his phone. She's been investigating corporate corruption in Montana for a decade. She knows the Grayson name, knows their reputation. She's eager to help. How many agents can she commit? Iris asked. A full tactical team if needed. 6 to 8 agents, plus technical support. They can be here in 12 hours once we give the signal. Good. Iris marked locations on the map. We'll arrange the meeting here at my cabin. Isolated, defensible, and I have security systems that will give us advance warning if they try anything aggressive. We'll tell Warren Grayson to come alone, but he won't. He'll bring protection, private security, probably armed. That's why we need the FBI present, Kitt said. Professional witnesses who can't be bought or intimidated. Jude had been quiet, studying the map and the plan. How do we contact Warren? How do we let him know we have the recording without tipping our hand? Iris smiled. I've been communicating with the Grayson family's lawyers through the lawsuit. They know there's evidence, but they don't know what kind or how damaging. Tomorrow, I'll have our lawyer send a message. We have new evidence that conclusively proves Vernon Grayson murdered Raymond Maddox. Evidence we're prepared to release to law enforcement and the media unless a settlement is reached within 48 hours. That'll get his attention, Tobias said. It'll do more than that. It'll terrify him. Iris's voice was satisfied. Warren has spent his entire life protecting his father's legacy, expanding the family empire. The threat of it all collapsing, of going to prison, Of the Grayson name becoming synonymous with murder, he'll do anything to prevent that, including coming here personally, Kitt said. Exactly. He'll want to assess the threat himself, try to intimidate or buy us off. That's when the FBI moves in. It was a good plan, but Jude saw the risks. What if he doesn't come? What if he sends lawyers instead? Then we release the recording anyway, Iris said flatly. I've spent 30 years preparing for this. I'm not waiting any longer. That night, Jude couldn't sleep. She lay in the cabin's guest room, listening to the wind move through the trees outside, thinking about what would happen in the next few days. They were betting everything on Warren Grayson's pride and fear, on his belief that he could control any situation if he showed up in person. But men like Warren didn't get powerful by being predictable. What if he saw through the trap? What if he came with enough force to simply take what he wanted? She got up, pulled on a jacket and walked outside. The night was cold, clear, stars thick overhead. Iris was sitting on the porch, a blanket around her shoulders, holding a cup of tea. Couldn't sleep either, the old woman asked. Jude sat down beside her. I keep thinking about all the ways this could go wrong. Good, that means you're thinking clearly. Iris took a sip of tea. Plans like this always have risks, but doing nothing has risks too. The Graysons know you exist now. They know you're connected to the lawsuit. They'll come after you eventually, whether we confront them or not. I know. Jude looked out at the dark forest. I just keep thinking about my daughter. The real Lorelei. What if this puts her in danger? Tobias is monitoring the situation in Denver. If there's any indication the Graysons are moving against her, he'll alert local law enforcement. She has protection even if she doesn't know it. She shouldn't need protection. She's innocent in all this. Jude stopped, the words catching in her throat. She just exists. That's her only crime. Like you, Iris said quietly. Like your father. Like all of us, who had the misfortune of being born Maddox when the Graysons wanted what we had. She set down her tea and reached over to grip Jude's hand. I'm sorry I disappeared. Sorry I let you think I was dead. Sorry I used your daughter's name to find you. But I'm not sorry for fighting. And I hope you're not sorry either. Jude looked at her grandmother, this woman who'd spent 3 decades in hiding, gathering evidence, preparing for one final confrontation. There was steel in her, but also exhaustion. This fight had cost her everything, her home, her family, her life in the valley. But she'd kept fighting anyway. I'm not sorry, Jude said. Not anymore. They sat together in the darkness, 2 generations of Maddox women who'd survived by being harder than the mountains, colder than the winter. Tomorrow they'd make their move. Tomorrow they'd find out if justice was possible or if power would win again. The next morning, Iris's lawyer sent the message. By noon, they had a response. Warren Grayson's attorneys requested an immediate meeting to discuss the evidence and potential settlement. They proposed a conference call first, but Iris refused. In person, she insisted through the lawyer. Mr. Grayson comes here, sees the evidence himself, and then we negotiate. Otherwise, everything goes to the FBI and the media tomorrow. The attorneys tried to negotiate different terms, but Iris held firm. Finally, late in the afternoon, confirmation came through. Warren Grayson would arrive at the cabin tomorrow evening at 7 o'clock to review the evidence and discuss terms. He's coming, Iris announced, setting down the phone. It's happening. Tobias immediately called Agent Chen. We need your team in position by tomorrow afternoon. Discreet, out of sight, but ready to move. Understood, Chen's voice came through the speaker. We'll set up a perimeter at 4 o'clock. Audio and video surveillance on the cabin. The moment Grayson incriminates himself or makes a threat, we move in. He might bring security, Tobias warned. So will we. Don't worry, Mr. Reed. We've done this before. The rest of the day was preparation. Iris tested her security cameras, made sure the recording equipment was working, verified that the Vernon Grayson confession was backed up in multiple locations. It reviewed the legal documents, ensuring everything was properly filed and documented. Tobias coordinated with Agent Chen, going over entry points and timing. Jude stayed out of the way mostly. She cleaned her pistol, checked the perimeter, tried to stay calm. This was happening. Tomorrow night, One way or another, the fight that had shaped her entire life would reach its conclusion. That evening, they gathered around Iris's table for what might be their last quiet meal together. Iris had cooked. Venison stew, bread, strong coffee. Simple food, mountain food, the kind that sustained you through hard times. "My father used to make stew like this," Jude said quietly. "When I was little, before everything fell apart. I taught him," Iris said. "And my mother taught me. Maddox recipe going back generations." She smiled slightly. "After tomorrow, maybe that's all anyone will remember about our family. Not the stolen land or the murders. Just a recipe for good stew." "They'll remember more than that," Kitt said. "They'll remember that you fought, that when powerful people tried to bury the truth, you refused to let them." "I hope so," Iris said. "But either way, it ends tomorrow. One way or another, I can finally rest." The words hung in the air, equal parts determination and resignation. Iris was 82 years old. She'd spent half her life preparing for this moment. Whether it succeeded or failed, she'd given everything to it. Later, when the others had gone to bed, Jude found her grandmother on the porch again. "You're not planning to survive this, are you?" Jude asked. Iris didn't look surprised by the question. "I'm planning to see justice done. What happens to me after that?" She shrugged. "I'm old, Jude. Tired. If tomorrow ends with Warren Grayson in handcuffs, I'll consider it a life well lived. And if it ends with you dead, then you finish it. You take the evidence, work with Agent Chen, make sure the truth comes out." Iris turned to look at her. "Promise me, whatever happens tomorrow, you don't run. You don't hide. You stand and fight until it's done." Jude wanted to argue, to say they'd all survive, that everything would work out. But she'd lived in the mountains too long to believe in easy endings. "I promise," she said. They sat together until the cold drove them inside. Tomorrow would come soon enough, bringing Warren Grayson and whatever violence he brought with him. Tonight they'd rest. Tomorrow they'd fight. At 4 o'clock the next afternoon, Agent Chen and her team arrived. 6 agents in 3 vehicles, plus technical support. They set up positions around the cabin's perimeter, invisible from the access road, but with clear sightlines to the cabin and surrounding woods. Chen herself came to the cabin to coordinate final details. She was in her 40s, Asian American, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "We'll be recording everything," she told them. "Audio, video, the works. Anything Grayson says can and will be used against him. If he makes threats, admits to crimes, or attempts violence, we move in immediately." "What about his security?" Tobias asked. "We'll identify them as they arrive, run background checks in real time. If any of them have outstanding warrants or illegal weapons, that gives us additional cause to intervene." She looked at each of them seriously. "I need to be clear about something. Once this starts, once Grayson is here and the confrontation begins, you're in potential danger. He might try to intimidate you, threaten you, even harm you. My team will intervene as quickly as possible, but there could be seconds or even minutes where you're on your own. Are you prepared for that?" "Yes," Iris said without hesitation. Chen nodded. "Then we're ready. He should be here in less than 3 hours. Stay calm, stick to the plan, and let us do our jobs." The agents melted back into the forest. Jude watched them go, impressed by their professionalism. These were people who knew what they were doing, who'd done it before. That should have been comforting. Instead, it made everything feel more real, more dangerous. 7 o'clock approached. The sun was setting, the forest growing dark. Iris turned on the cabin's exterior lights, illuminating the clearing. Kitt and Tobias positioned themselves near the windows, watching the access road. Jude stood by the door, her pistol in her jacket pocket. At 6:58, headlights appeared on the access road. 3 vehicles, 2 black SUVs flanking a silver luxury sedan. They approached slowly, deliberately, parking in a line facing the cabin. "Here we go," Iris murmured. The vehicles sat for a moment, engines running. Then doors opened. From the SUVs came 6 men, private security, professional, armed. They spread out, taking positions, scanning the perimeter. They didn't see the FBI agents hidden in the shadows. From the sedan emerged Warren Grayson. He was 70 years old but looked younger, fit, well-dressed in an expensive coat and suit. His hair was silver, his face sharp and calculating. He walked toward the cabin with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no, who'd always gotten what he wanted. Behind him walked one more man, younger 30s maybe, wearing all black. He moved like Tobias moved, like someone with training, with experience in violence. Iris opened the door before Grayson could knock. She stood in the doorway, framed by light, holding herself straight despite her age. "Warren," she said. "It's been a long time." Grayson stopped, his eyes widening slightly. "Iris Maddox, I heard you were dead." "A lot of people did." "That was the point." She stepped aside. "Come in. We have much to discuss." Warren Grayson entered the cabin with the careful attention of a man walking into potential danger. His eyes swept the room, taking in Jude, Kitt, Tobias, the walls covered with evidence. The security man in black stayed close, hand near his jacket, where a weapon likely rested. "You can leave your man outside," Iris said. "This is a private conversation." "Malcolm stays with me," Warren said flatly. "Non-negotiable." Iris shrugged. "Suit yourself. But if he tries anything, my granddaughter there is armed, and the man by the window used to be federal law enforcement. It won't end well for anyone." Warren glanced at Jude, seeing her for the first time. His expression shifted. Surprise, calculation. "So you're Thomas's daughter, the one who disappeared." "I'm Samuel Maddox's granddaughter," Jude said evenly, "and Raymond Maddox's niece. I'm here to talk about what your family did to mine." "Alleged," Warren said smoothly. "What my family allegedly did. So far, all I've seen are accusations from a woman who faked her own death and hid for 30 years. Not exactly the most credible witness." Iris moved to the table where the recording device sat. "I have something you need to hear. A conversation recorded 25 years ago. Your father, Vernon Grayson, talking to a business associate about how he acquired the Maddox land." Warren's expression didn't change, but Malcolm shifted slightly. They knew this was the leverage, the thing that had brought them here. "I'd like to hear it," Warren said. Iris pressed play. The audio quality was poor. Old technology recorded in what sounded like a bar or restaurant, but the voices were clear enough. Vernon Grayson's voice, slightly slurred with alcohol. "Old fool Maddox thought he was untouchable because his daddy gave him that land. Thought I couldn't touch him. But I had better lawyers, better connections. Fixed up a deed, backdated it, got a judge I owned to rule in my favor. Took everything from him." Another voice, younger, cautious. "What about the son?" "Raymond, he was asking questions." "Raymond's been handled. Won't be asking questions anymore." "Handled how?" A laugh. "Let's just say he took a long walk in the woods and didn't come back. My boys made sure of that. Family like the Maddoxes, they forget their place. They need reminders. You take their land, take their pride, take their life if necessary. That's how you stay on top in this valley." "Jesus, Vernon. You're talking about murder. I'm talking about business. Murder's just a word. The result is what matters. The Maddoxes are finished. And I own the best land in 3 counties. The recording went on for another minute. Vernon Grayson bragging about bribing officials, fixing court cases, eliminating problems. Then it ended. The cabin was silent. Warren's face had gone carefully blank, but his hands were clenched. "That's a copy," Iris said calmly. "I have the original in 3 separate secure locations. If anything happens to me, it gets released to the FBI, the state attorney general, and every media outlet in Montana. Your father's voice, confessing to forging documents and murdering my son. Conspiracy to murder, fraud, corruption. You'll spend the rest of your life fighting criminal charges and civil lawsuits." Warren was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was controlled but tight. "My father is dead." "You can't prosecute a dead man." "No," Tobias said from the window. "But we can prosecute the people who helped cover up his crimes. The people who benefited from those crimes. You, Mr. Grayson, you inherited everything your father built on stolen land and murder. You've spent decades protecting his legacy, expanding the criminal enterprise. That makes you complicit. You have no proof I knew anything about this recording or what my father did." "Actually, we do," Iris said. She pulled out another document, financial records from 15 years ago. These show payments you personally authorized to silence witnesses, to pay off officials investigating your company's environmental violations. The same pattern your father used. Like father, like son. Warren's jaw tightened. Malcolm's hand moved closer to his jacket. "Everyone stay calm," Kitt said quietly, positioning himself where he could see Malcolm. "We're just talking. What do you want?" Warren asked, directing the question to Iris. "You didn't bring me here just to threaten me. You want something. Money, a settlement. Name your price." "I don't want your money," Iris said. "I want justice. I want you to confess to covering up your father's crimes. I want you to return the land that was stolen from my family. And I want you to serve time in prison for conspiracy." Warren actually laughed. "You're insane. That's never going to happen. Then the recording goes public tomorrow. The FBI will have probable cause to investigate everything. Your company, your finances, your personal life. They'll find the corruption, Warren. You know they will. You're not as careful as your father was. If you release that recording, I'll bury you in lawsuits. I'll destroy whatever credibility you think you have. You're an old woman who faked her death and has been hiding in the woods for 30 years. Who's going to believe you?" "The FBI," Tobias said. "They've been wanting to investigate your family for a decade. This gives them cause." Warren turned to look at him, really seeing him for the first time. "I know you. You're George Reed's son, the Fed who died investigating my company." "My father didn't die," Tobias said coldly. "He was killed, just like Raymond Maddox, just like Edmund Kitt, just like everyone else who got too close to the truth about your family." "Careful," Malcolm warned, his hand now clearly on his weapon. "No." Agent Chen's voice came through a speaker they'd hidden in the cabin. "You be careful." Everyone froze. Warren's face went pale. The front door opened and Chen walked in, followed by 2 armed FBI agents. Outside, Jude could see more agents emerging from the forest, surrounding the cabin and the vehicles. "Warren Grayson," Chen said, showing her credentials. "I'm Special Agent Monica Chen, FBI. You're under investigation for conspiracy to obstruct justice, witness tampering, and accessory after the fact to murder. Everything you've said in this cabin has been recorded. Your security team outside is currently being detained." Malcolm's hand was still on his weapon. Chen's agents had their guns drawn, pointed at him. "Don't," Chen said calmly. "You're outnumbered and outgunned. Take your hand off the weapon slowly." Malcolm looked at Warren, who nodded slightly. Malcolm removed his hand, raised both hands. "Smart," Chen said. One of her agents moved forward, disarmed Malcolm, and led him outside. Warren stood in the center of the cabin, surrounded by evidence of his family's crimes, by FBI agents, by the people he'd thought he could intimidate or buy. "This is entrapment," he said. "Anything I said here isn't admissible." "Actually it is," Chen said. "You entered this property voluntarily, knowing you were coming to discuss evidence of crimes. You were free to leave at any time. Instead, you stayed and made several statements that establish your knowledge of your father's crimes and your efforts to cover them up." She moved closer. "We have enough for multiple charges, Mr. Grayson, but right now, I'm giving you one chance. Cooperate with our investigation. Provide testimony about your father's criminal activities and the network that supported them. Help us identify everyone involved in the corruption. Do that and we can discuss a reduced sentence." "I want my lawyer," Warren said. "You're entitled to one, but this offer expires the moment you walk out that door. After that, we prosecute to the full extent of the law, and you spend the rest of your life in prison." Chen's voice was professional but firm. "Your family's empire is over. Mr. Grayson, the only question is whether you're going to help us take it down properly or whether you're going to go down with it." Warren looked around the cabin, at the evidence on the walls, at Iris standing tall despite her age, at Jude watching him with her grandfather's eyes, at Kitt, the son of the journalist his family had killed, at Tobias, the son of the investigator they'd silenced. For 3 generations, the Grayson family had controlled this valley through fear and money and violence. They'd stolen land, destroyed families, murdered anyone who got in their way. Now finally, someone was pushing back. Warren Grayson stood in silence for what felt like an eternity. Jude could see the calculation in his eyes, weighing options, considering angles, looking for a way out that didn't end with him in prison. But there was no way out. Not anymore. The evidence was too strong, the witnesses too credible, the FBI too invested. Finally, he spoke. "If I cooperate, what exactly are you offering?" "Reduced charges," Chen said. "We're interested in the larger network. The judges you paid off, the officials who looked the other way, the business partners who helped launder money. Give us names, documentation, testimony that leads to convictions, and we'll recommend a lighter sentence." "How much lighter?" "That depends on how much you help. Full cooperation could mean 15 years instead of life. Partial cooperation, 25 years. No cooperation," she let the implication hang. Warren's hands clenched and unclenched. 15 years would still mean he'd die in prison. He was 70 years old. But life without parole was worse. At least with a deal, there was a chance of dying as something other than a convicted murderer. "I need guarantees," he said. "In writing. My lawyer needs to review—" "No," Iris interrupted. Her voice cut through the room like a blade. "You don't get to negotiate. You don't get to protect yourself. You answer for what your family did, or we release that recording and let the court of public opinion destroy you before the actual courts do." She stepped closer to him. This elderly woman who'd spent 30 years planning this moment. "My son was 28 years old when your father murdered him. He had a wife, a daughter. He died because he asked questions about a forged deed. Your father killed him and buried him in the woods like he was nothing." Warren didn't respond, but his jaw tightened. "My grandson Thomas lost everything because of your father's lies. Lost his land, his home, his family. He died broken and afraid, never getting justice for what was done to him." Iris's voice shook slightly, emotion breaking through her careful control. "You don't get to make deals. You don't get to walk away. You face what you did, or I'll spend whatever time I have left making sure everyone knows the Grayson name means murder and theft and cowardice." "Easy," Chen said gently. "Mrs. Maddox, I understand your anger, but—" "No, you don't," Iris said. "You didn't watch your family destroyed. You didn't spend decades hiding while these people lived in mansions built on stolen land. You didn't—" She stopped, breathing hard. Jude moved to her grandmother's side, steadying her. "We have him," she said quietly. "It's over. He's going to pay." Iris nodded, but tears were running down her weathered face. 30 years of rage and grief finally released. Warren watched this, his expression unreadable. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, less arrogant, more resigned. "What do you want me to say? That my father was a criminal? Fine, he was. I've known it my whole life. I've known what he did to Raymond Maddox, what he did to your family. And yes, I helped cover it up because I didn't want to lose everything we'd built." "Not everything you'd built," Jude said. "Everything you'd stolen." "Semantics." Warren's laugh was bitter. "You think you're so righteous. But every family with money in this state has blood somewhere in its history. We're just the ones who got caught. Because we didn't stop," Iris said. "Because we refused to let you get away with it. Congratulations." Warren spread his hands. "You've won. The Grayson family is finished. Our reputation will be destroyed, our assets seized, our name synonymous with corruption. Are you satisfied?" "Not yet," Tobias said from the window. He'd been quiet, watching, but now he moved forward. "There's one more thing you need to do. You need to tell us about Harlan Kitt, about how he died." Warren looked confused. "The journalist? That was an accident. His brakes failed. His brakes were sabotaged," Tobias said flatly. "My father investigated the wreck. He found evidence of tampering. He documented it, reported it to his superiors, and then he conveniently died of a heart attack before the investigation could proceed." He moved closer to Warren, his face hard. "Did you kill him? Did you have someone kill him to protect your father's secrets?" "I didn't." Warren stopped, seeing something in Tobias's eyes. "Your father was the federal investigator. George Reed." "Yes, I didn't kill him. I didn't even know he'd found evidence of tampering." Warren's voice was quieter now, less defiant. "But I can tell you who did. Malcolm, my security chief. The man your agents just took outside. He's been with my family for 20 years. He's the one who handles—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "He handles problems, including people who ask too many questions." Jude felt a chill. Malcolm, the silent man in black, was a professional killer. He'd been standing right here, armed, ready to act if the confrontation had gone differently. Chen spoke into her radio. "Detain Malcolm separately. Possible suspect in multiple homicides. I want him isolated and under heavy guard until we can question him properly." She turned back to Warren. "If what you're saying is true, if Malcolm was acting under your family's orders, that's murder for hire. That makes you criminally liable." "He wasn't acting under my orders," Warren said quickly. "He was acting under my father's. I inherited Malcolm along with everything else. I didn't know the extent of what he'd done until after my father died." "But you kept him employed," Kitt said. "You kept him close, kept using him. That makes you complicit." Warren had no answer for that. Chen pulled out handcuffs. "Warren Grayson, you're under arrest for conspiracy to obstruct justice, accessory after the fact to multiple murders, and racketeering. You have the right to remain silent?" As she read him his rights, Jude watched Warren's face. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something closer to defeat. This man who'd controlled the valley, who'd thought himself untouchable, was being led out of a cabin in handcuffs, while FBI agents documented evidence of his family's crimes. Justice. Finally. The agents led Warren outside, where more vehicles had arrived, transport vans, evidence collection teams, additional agents to process the scene. Through the window, Jude could see Malcolm being loaded into a separate vehicle, his face expressionless even in custody. Iris sat down heavily at the table, suddenly looking every one of her 82 years. "It's done," she said quietly. "It's finally done." Kitt moved to the wall, looking at the decades of evidence. "Your son would be proud. Your grandson, too." "I hope so." Iris touched the photograph of Raymond. "I hope they can rest now." Tobias stood by the door, watching the FBI work. "This isn't quite over," he said. "Warren's arrest is just the beginning. There will be months of investigation, trials, testimony. The Grayson network runs deep. Rooting it all out will take time. But it will be rooted out," Chen said, coming back inside. "I promise you that. We've been waiting for an opening like this for years. Now that we have it, we're not letting go." She looked at Iris. "Mrs. Maddox, you'll need to give an official statement. Your testimony will be crucial for prosecution. Whatever you need," Iris said. "I'll give you everything I have." "What about protection?" Jude asked. "If the Grayson network is as deep as you say, there could be retaliation. We'll provide protection for everyone involved," Chen assured her. "Round-the-clock surveillance, safe houses if necessary. The Bureau takes witness security seriously." Jude looked at her grandmother, at this woman who'd sacrificed everything for justice. "What will you do?" "After the trials, after everything's finished?" Iris smiled slightly. "Rest. Maybe finally stop looking over my shoulder. Maybe return to the valley, see the land where I was born." She reached across the table and took Jude's hand. "Maybe spend some time with my granddaughter. Get to know her again." "I'd like that," Jude said, surprising herself. 30 years of separation, of anger and hurt and misunderstanding. But underneath all of that there was still family, still connection. Outside, Agent Chen was coordinating the removal of evidence and the processing of the arrested security team. The cabin that had been Iris's fortress for 2 decades was now a crime scene, marked off with yellow tape and swarming with federal agents. But inside, in the small space where 4 people had confronted a family dynasty, there was quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after a storm, when the violence has passed and you can finally breathe again. "What about Lorelei?" Jude asked suddenly. "The real Lorelei. Should I—" "That's up to you," Iris said. "The story we used to find you was a lie, but the person is real. She exists. Whether you reach out to her, whether you try to build a relationship, that's your choice. No pressure, no manipulation this time. Just your choice." Jude thought about the photograph Kitt had shown her weeks ago. The young woman in scrubs, smiling, living her life. A daughter who didn't know she had a birth mother thinking about her. "Maybe someday," Jude said, "when all this is settled, When I can approach her honestly, without lies or manipulation. Maybe then. That sounds wise, Kitt said. He'd been gathering his notes, preparing to leave. For what it's worth, I'm sorry about the deception. I should have verified the story before approaching you. You were doing your job, Jude said. And in a strange way, the lie led to the truth. If you hadn't found me, none of this would have happened. Silver linings, Kitt said with a slight smile. As the night wore on, as the FBI finished their initial processing and began preparing for the long work ahead, Jude stepped outside. The forest was dark, the stars bright overhead. The same stars that had watched over her for 30 years while she hid. The same stars that had watched her grandmother gather evidence. The same stars that had watched the Graysons build their empire on blood and lies. But tomorrow, when those stars faded and the sun rose, the valley would be different. Justice would be done. Truth would be told. And maybe, finally, the Maddox family could rest. 2 weeks later, Jude stood at the edge of Whisper Ridge, looking down at the valley she'd left 30 years ago. The autumn colors were at their peak, gold and red and orange painting the mountainsides. The same colors she remembered from her childhood, before everything fell apart. The FBI investigation had moved quickly. Warren Grayson was being held without bail, facing 17 federal charges. Malcolm, his security chief, had been charged with 3 counts of murder. Edmund Kitt, George Reed, and a witness who disappeared 15 years ago. Several judges and county officials had been arrested for corruption. The Grayson business empire was being systematically dismantled, assets frozen, properties seized. In the valley below, the town was adjusting to the new reality. The Grayson name, once synonymous with power and prosperity, now meant scandal and shame. Some people were angry. They'd worked for Grayson companies, depended on them for jobs. Others were relieved. The family's grip on the valley had loosened, and people could finally speak freely about what they'd witnessed, what they'd known but been too afraid to say. Jude heard footsteps behind her. Iris, moving slowly but steadily, came to stand beside her. "I never thought I'd see this view again," the old woman said. "Thought I'd die in that cabin in Montana, hidden away forever. But you didn't," Jude said. "You lived long enough to see justice." "We did," Iris corrected. "We both did." They stood together in comfortable silence, 2 women who'd survived by being harder than the land demanded. The wind moved through the pines, carrying the smell of autumn and the promise of winter. "The lawyer called this morning," Iris said. "The Grayson family's attorneys are proposing a settlement. They want to avoid a trial, want to return the land that was taken from us. 200 acres restored to the Maddox family, along with financial compensation for 40 years of wrongful possession. Will you accept?" "I don't know. Part of me wants to see Warren stand trial, wants the world to hear every detail of what his family did. But another part," she touched the railing of the overlook where they stood, "another part is tired. Wants to take the land back and live out my remaining days in peace. What does the lawyer recommend?" "He says the settlement is generous, more than we'd likely get from a jury. And it comes with an admission of wrongdoing, which matters for the historical record. The Grayson family acknowledging they stole our land, that Vernon murdered Raymond." Iris looked at Jude. "But it's not just my decision. You're Samuel Maddox's granddaughter. You have a say in this too." Jude thought about it. The land, the money, the admission of guilt. Was that justice? Or was justice only possible through a public trial, through Warren Grayson standing in a courtroom and facing what his family had done? "I think," Jude said slowly, "that you've fought long enough. If the settlement gives us the land back, gives us acknowledgement of the truth, then that's enough. Let the federal charges handle the rest. Let Warren face prison time for the murders and corruption. But as for our family's claim, let's take it and move forward." Iris nodded, relief evident on her face. "I was hoping you'd say that. I'm ready to stop fighting. Ready to be something other than angry." They walked back down the trail together, Iris leaning on Jude's arm. The cabin at the base of the ridge, the one that had been seized from the Grayson family as part of the criminal investigation, would be returned to them. The land their grandfather had loved, that he'd never wanted to sell, would be Maddox land again. At the bottom of the trail, Vincent was waiting by his truck. The old logger had driven up when he heard Jude was back in the area, wanting to see her, to hear the full story. "Quite a thing you did," he said simply. "Taking on the Graysons, winning. We had help," Jude said, "and evidence. And luck. Still took courage," he smiled. "Your father would have been proud." The words hit deeper than Jude expected. She'd spent 30 years angry at her father, believing he'd cast her out because she'd shamed the family. Now she knew the truth, that he'd pushed her away to save her life, that every harsh word had been an act of desperate love. "Thank you," she said quietly. Over the following weeks, life found a new rhythm. The diner reopened. Jude hired 2 people to help manage it, realizing she didn't have to do everything alone anymore. Iris moved into a smaller house in town, close enough to Jude that they could see each other regularly, but still allowing both women their independence. The trials began. Warren Grayson, facing overwhelming evidence, eventually took a plea deal. 25 years in federal prison for conspiracy and accessory after the fact. Malcolm received life without parole for murder. 11 other defendants, including judges and county officials, faced their own charges. The Grayson business empire was dismantled piece by piece. Properties returned to rightful owners. Ill-gotten gains distributed to victims. A new sheriff was elected, this one without ties to corruption. The valley slowly healed. One morning in late November, Jude received a letter. The return address was Denver, Colorado. Her hands shook slightly as she opened it. "Dear Judith, my name is Lorelei Brennan. You don't know me, but I recently learned some surprising information about my birth. I was adopted as an infant, and I've always known this, but I never felt a strong need to search for my biological parents. My adoptive family has been wonderful, and I've had a good life. However, a lawyer contacted me last month saying someone had been asking about me, using my name in an investigation. When I looked into it, I found records that led me to you. I'm told you're my birth mother. I'm not writing to demand anything or to disrupt your life. I'm sure you had your reasons for the adoption, and I respect that. But I wanted you to know that I exist, that I turned out okay, and that if you ever wanted to meet, just once, just to talk, I'd be open to it. No pressure. No expectations. Just an offer to sit down together someday if you're interested. Take care." Lorelei. Jude read the letter 3 times. Then she set it on her kitchen table, made tea, and thought about what to do. She could ignore it. Pretend she never received it. Keep Lorelei safely distant. A theoretical daughter rather than a real one, or she could respond. Take the risk. Reach across 30 years of silence and see if connection was possible. The wooden box sat on a shelf in her cabin now, no longer hidden. Inside were the letters she'd written over the years, the ones she'd never sent. 30 years of words, explanations, apologies, love. Maybe it was time to share them. Jude pulled out paper and began to write. "Dear Lorelei, thank you for your letter. Yes, I'm your birth mother, though I've never felt I had the right to that title. I was 19 when I had you, alone, afraid, and convinced I couldn't give you the life you deserved. The adoption was the hardest decision I've ever made, but I believed it was the right one. I'd very much like to meet you, not to explain or justify, just to see your face, hear your voice, know that you're real and well. I've letters I wrote to you over the years, 30 of them, one for each birthday. I never sent them because I didn't think I had the right. But if you want to read them, they're yours. There's no rush. When you're ready, I'll be here. I've spent 30 years learning how to wait. With love, I never stopped feeling, Judith." She sealed the letter, addressed it, and walked to town to mail it. The November air was cold, the first snow threatening in heavy grey clouds. Winter was coming, as it always did in the mountains. But winter meant spring would follow. Endings meant beginnings. At the diner, regular customers greeted her warmly. The story had gotten out, not all the details, but enough. People knew the Maddoxes had stood up to the Graysons and won. Knew that justice had been done. Some viewed Jude as a hero. Others just saw her as the woman who made good coffee and didn't ask questions. She preferred the latter. Vincent came in for his usual breakfast. As Jude poured his coffee, he said, "You look different." "How so?"
Lighter.
"Like you're not carrying the world on your shoulders anymore." Jude thought about that. He was right. The weight she'd carried for 30 years, the shame, the guilt, the fear, had lifted. Not entirely, but enough to breathe. Enough to imagine a future instead of just surviving the present. "Maybe I'm not," she said. That evening she drove up to the land that was now officially theirs again. 200 acres on Whisper Ridge, returned to the Maddox family. Aris had asked what they should do with it, and Jude had suggested they keep it wild. Let the trees grow, let the animals roam. Let it be what it had always meant to be, a place of peace. She walked through the forest until she found a clearing she remembered from childhood. Her grandfather had brought her here once, taught her to identify animal tracks, to read the language of the woods. She'd been 7 years old, and the world had seemed infinite and safe. Now she was 57, and the world was neither infinite nor safe. But standing here, in this place that had been fought for and won back, she felt something she hadn't felt in decades. Hope. The sun was setting, casting long shadows through the trees. Jude sat on a fallen log and pulled out the photograph she always carried, the one of her as a young woman, pregnant, terrified, trying to be brave. She looked at that girl, saw her fear and determination, and whispered, "We made it. We survived." The wind moved through the pines, carrying no answer but its own ancient voice. But that was enough. She was Judith Maddox. Mountain woman, survivor, fighter, mother, grandmother, daughter. She'd run from her past, hidden from her family, built a life of careful isolation. But in the end, she'd stood and fought for what was right, and she'd won. The stars began appearing in the darkening sky. The same stars that had watched generations of Maddoxes struggle and survive. The same stars that would watch generations to come. She thought about Lorelei, about the possibility of meeting her daughter, about Iris finally at peace, about her father and uncle and grandfather, their struggles finally acknowledged and honored. They'd paid a terrible price for justice. But justice had come. Jude stood, looked one last time at the valley below, and walked back down the mountain. Tomorrow, she'd open the diner. She'd serve coffee and eggs to people who had their own struggles and stories. She'd live her life, no longer hiding, no longer afraid. And maybe, someday soon, she'd sit across a table from her daughter and tell her the truth. All of it, the mistakes and the love and the years of silence. Maybe Lorelei would understand. Maybe she wouldn't. But either way, Jude would have tried. That was enough. That was everything. The path home was familiar, worn smooth by her own footsteps over years of walking. She knew every route, every turn, every shadow. This land had shaped her, hardened her, taught her to survive. Now, finally, it could teach her how to live.